Hey guys, it's me. We are back for chapter 7 of Book Scavenger. Chapter 6 ended with them like finding the spot by the subway where Mr. Griswold had been mugged. So Emily's a little bit shaken up by that. So we'll see what happens in chapter 7. Here we go. If it weren't for the pile of mementos honoring Mr. Griswold, a person might pass this corner and never guess something horrible had happened there. A poster board leaned against the railing. It read, "Get well soon, Mr. Griswold. Your city needs you." Flowers, candles, stuffed animals, and cards were in the pile, but more than any other item, there were books. Lots of books, as if all the people in the city had brought their favorites just for Mr. Griswold. "I feel like we should leave something," Emily said. James looked in the nylon bag that held his grandmother's vegetables. He pulled out a bundle of leafy greens. "Bok choy?" Emily dropped to one knee and opened her backpack. She tore a piece of paper from her notebook and folded it into a makeshift card. She and James crouched on the sidewalk to write a note and sign it. James also signed Steve with 3 little lines coming up from the second E like a cowlick. Emily held the card up to Matthew. "What?" "You should sign it too." "I don't even know the guy." "Sign it, Matthew." With a grumble, Matthew held out his hand for a marker. When Emily took the card back, she read what Matthew wrote. "My sister is bummed about what happened to you, so she's making me sign this. Get well soon, Mr. Candyman." "Matthew, you can't write that, and I've told you before, the Willy Wonka nickname has nothing to do with candy. He makes books." "Fine, I'll fix it." He took the card back, crossed out Mr. Candyman, and wrote, "Old book dude." "That's even worse." Emily snatched the paper from Matthew and crumpled it in her hands. "So, where did it happen anyway?" Matthew asked. "Do you think he was standing right here?" Emily shivered. "Creepy. I don't want to think about that." "I think it was down in the station," James said. "I'm going to check it out." Matthew was halfway down the stairs before Emily or James could say another word. "Matthew, get back here," Emily yelled after him. "It's not closed or anything," Matthew shouted from below. "This would be a sweet spot for a music video." Emily and James clambered down the stairs after him. The air grew warmer and more stale with every step until they were underground, standing next to Matthew, who panned the area with the video on his smartphone. The station was an expansive, slick-walled cave with flickering overhead lighting. Slow, far-away notes from a clarinet player Emily couldn't see made her think the station must stretch pretty far back from where they stood. Bright advertisement posters for Beach Blanket Babylon, Tetro Zinzani, and other San Francisco businesses were framed and hanging along the walls on columns. Fingerprint-smudged glass walls and electronic gates separated them from the escalators and stairs that went down to the level where the trains came and went. A woman walked down the stairs behind them and straight through the fare gate, like she did this all the time. Up ahead, a group entered from a further entrance and turned to walk away from them from the opposite end of the station. Did these people even realize where they were or know what violent thing had happened here just one day before? Thanks to her brother's earlier question, Emily couldn't stop wondering where Mr. Griswold had been when he was mugged. Was he arriving on a train or downstairs waiting for one? She didn't want to be thinking like that, which of course made it all the more difficult to stop. "Let's get out of here," Emily said. As she turned to leave, she lobbed the crumpled ball of her ruined card at a trash can, but it came up a few feet short. When she bent down to pick up her litter, she spotted the maroon edge of a book jammed between the can and the wall. Oh, I have been hoping this whole time that Emily would find this book. Sorry. Anyways. "No way," she said. She pried the book loose from its spot and held it up. "A hidden book." "Is that for Book Scavenger?" James asked. "The Gold Bug," Emily read the title. It would totally make up for the Babbage poaching her book if this was, in fact, for Book Scavenger. She flipped the cover open. "There's no tracking label on the inside. You're assigned a unique tracking number when you register a book with Book Scavenger," she explained to James. "You print the number on a label and put it inside the book. But sometimes people forget or they don't care about tracking the book, so they don't print the label and put it inside. But this must have been hidden, right? Why would someone throw this away? It looks brand new." She considered the book again. The gold beetle embossed on the front glittered at her. I'll leave my card, just in case." She crouched by the trash can, but before she could place her card, James nudged her. Your brother?" Emily looked up to see Matthew applying a bumper sticker for Flush to the face of the ticket machine. "Matthew, what are you doing? You actually carry those around in your pocket?" "A devoted swirly carries Flush paraphernalia at all times. That's rule number 1. Rule number 2 is flush adornment makes the world a better place. Besides, sticker slapping never hurt anyone. Do you not see the sign? Directly above him was a sign that read, "No vandalism. Violators will be prosecuted." Matthew waved a hand dismissively. "That's like a beware of dog sign for Chihuahua owners. Nobody's even here. This place is practically empty." "Practically is not the same as totally," James said, shifting from foot to foot as he eyed 2 men who had come into view on the far side of the station. "Cut it out, seriously," Emily said. She hastily slid her calling card behind the trash can, adjusting it so it could be easily seen by someone looking for it, but not spotted as trash. She stood and nodded toward the approaching men. "Those guys are watching us." One was short and squat, and the other tall and thin as a lamppost. The men were uncomfortably focused on them. If there was any doubt about that, it was squashed when the short man punched his friend on the arm and stabbed a finger in their direction. The tall one cupped a hand around his mouth and shouted, "Hey, you kids, stop!" "Matthew, you idiot," Emily said. "Undercover security. Run!" Matthew shouted. So they think they're in trouble because of the sticker. That's funny. They flew to the staircase, Emily still clutching her new book. James pushed past Matthew when they hit the sidewalk. "Follow Steve," James shouted, his spiky tuft bob wildly as they ran. James headed back in the direction of the ferry building. They hurtled flowers and stuffed animals, pounding down the brick-laid sidewalk until they reached a wall of people lining up to board a bus. "Excuse us," James shouted as they dove through the line. James turned a corner by the bucket man, who was still beating his makeshift drums in a frenzy. They ran toward the empty outdoor mall, the splattering of immense concrete fountain urging them on. Emily looked over her shoulder. The men were still behind them, rounding past the bucket man. "Keep running," she shouted to James and Matthew. James turned past a bakery and entered the mall. Glass-fronted stores passed by in a blur. Then James turned slightly and hustled upstairs. There was nothing but the sound of their feet pounding until, finally, they slowed to a stop outside the public restrooms. "I think we lost them," Matthew said between gasps. "Quiet!" James held a finger to his lips. Emily, James, and Matthew hugged the wall next to the restrooms to stay out of view of anyone on the lower level until footsteps thundered beneath them and then faded. A man swore, which echoed in the empty shopping center. Another voice said, "I told you they circled back to the park. Come on!" Emily counted to 100 in her head. Then, when she was certain the men were gone, turned to her brother, her face hot from running and growing hotter with anger. "Matthew!" She thwacked him with the maroon book, and that book still gripped in her hand. "I can't believe you." "Geez, chill out." Matthew wiped sweat from his forehead with a corner of his t-shirt. Who would have thought security guards would get so worked up over a stupid bumper sticker? That is the end of chapter 7. So those men are hopefully going to leave Emily alone, but I think this book would not be as entertaining if that were the case. So we'll hope for the best. I'll see you guys next time for chapter 8. Bye!